If you're having a hard time right now, emotionally, if you're feeling really angry, really sad, really scared right now about things going on in your life, or you're just really stressed and you're feeling overwhelmed, it's going around, right? I have a technique that I can show you in just 15 minutes that can help you take those negative emotions and bring them back down where they're a little easier for you. I can't make all your problems go away, but I can show you how to take the intensity of your thinking and bring it back to where you have more comfort and you have more space to think and make choices in your life. In this video, I'm teaching you the core technique that I teach in a free online course, but I'm putting it out here on YouTube right now because I noticed so many people need it. I just want to make it as easy as pie for you to learn this writing technique that literally saved my life 27 years ago. This is what I call the daily practice. I'm going to show you real fast, and I'm going to teach you about why it seems to help, all right? So if you'd like to follow along with me, I'm going to demonstrate it. You can follow along. Go get some paper and a pen. And I'm going to invite you to write down your fears and resentments. And I'm going to give you the format. And it goes like this. I have fear. So you write, I have fear. See how I did? And then go ahead and complete that. So what is the first fear that you have that comes into your mind? You don't have to go into the past, just like what's on your mind right now. What are you worried about? For me, I'm going to make one up so for the point of teaching that's going to give me a good example to show you. So let's try this. I have fear the neighbor graffitied my wall. That didn't really happen, but it's kind of fun to think about. He's like 90 years old. All right, but as an example, that could have happened. I have fear that my neighbor graffitied my wall. Now I'm going to hang out with that fear for a minute and go, yeah, what's the fear about that? Fear he won't admit it. Fear he hates me. Fear all the neighbors hate me. Fear now the house looks trashy. Fear the landlord is going to make me pay for it. Fear that this always happens to me, that I live somewhere and the place gets trashed. So that's an example of how there's just sort of a little cascade of 6 or 7 fears that come out of the first fear, which is I have fear the neighbor is the one who graffitied on the wall. So as I'm writing, I might notice that I actually have resentment. So let's take this example again. I'm resentful at the other neighbor across the street because I have fear that they are chummy with the neighbor who I think graffitied. Fear they get together all the time. And fear they exclude me. Now let's go back. You notice when I said I have resentment, and here's my writing, again, just scribbly scrabbly. This is not a perfect list. They're not columns or anything. When I said I had resentment, it was because I noticed it's like I have a lingering kind of anger. I'm stewing on it. I'm ruminating on it. So you pick a target, and it's going to be usually a person or a group of people or a category of people or maybe a country or an organization or something that used to be part of like my elementary school, okay? So you name the target. So I'm resentful at the other neighbor across the street, and instead of immediately writing why, because she's chummy with the neighbor who I think graffitied, I write because I have fear she is chummy with the neighbor, and fear they hang out all the time, and fear they talk about me behind my back, and fear I'm never invited. All right, so it turns out there was more fear there about this whole thing, but it was sort of hiding underneath this resentment, like, oh, that neighbor across the street, I'm resentful at her. So I keep writing. I mean, every time you sit down to write, you could take 10 or 15 minutes anytime. I've done it even faster when I had to. But you write ideally until you feel better. And I will just say that sometimes feeling better has meant 20 pages. And the reason I'm making this video today is because yesterday I was really feeling bad about something that had happened. And so I went ahead and I wrote for a long time. And it ended up being 20 pages, just 20 of these pages. Front was 1 page, back was 1 page. And I felt so much better because I got underneath to what was bothering me. So when I'm sitting down to write, I might have some very intense fears, fear I have cancer, fear that's what this pain is. I don't actually fear I have cancer, just in case you're worried, but that would be a typical, like, intense fear that you have. You might also have fears that are very trivial. So fear I've run out of lettuce. And then I'm resentful at my husband because I have fear I asked him to buy lettuce yesterday and he didn't. So sometimes these resentments are really petty, sometimes they're profound. But when we're writing them in the daily practice, they're all just fodder for getting free. So every thought that's troubling your mind goes onto the paper so you can get free. And the metaphor that I often use for this is, think of leaves, wet leaves that stick to the windshield of a car, right? So it's raining outside, it's autumn, the leaves are falling, there's all these leaves caked up on your windshield and you can't see. And that's what your fearful and resentful thoughts are like. They just arrive, they come, it's normal, it's natural, you get these thoughts, but they get stuck on your windshield, and if they're there, you can't see. And you can run your windshield wipers and nothing happens, they're just stuck. So you get out and you pick those leaves off, right? So think of those as fears and resentments. You pick them off, you throw them down. Pick them off, throw them down. You don't have to study them. You don't have to put them in a scrapbook. You don't have to look them up in the encyclopedia to find out what kind of tree it is. You're just going to get them off the windshield, and then you can see more clearly and you can move forward. That's my favorite metaphor for what this writing is like. So when you've written for a while and you begin to feel better, like, got that out, because it does feel good to get it out on paper. We're not dwelling on it, remember. You're not focusing on the negative. You're basically taking the negative thoughts that are already there and writing them down so you can stop thinking about them, which is the same reason we ever take notes, right? If somebody tells you their phone number and you're trying to remember it, but you have nowhere to like put it in your phone or write it down, you're going to have to say it over and over and over again in your mind, 526 or 741, 526. You write it down, there. Now you can stop thinking about it. So that's the very simple means that you can start to take your negative thoughts and get them onto paper. Now, this is not an exercise to pretend negative stuff doesn't exist. You're not forcing yourself to think positively. It's nothing like that. All you're doing is just kind of admitting to yourself, I've got this dark thought, I've got this negative thought, I've got this bad feeling, this is fear this, fear that, I'm resentful at so-and-so because. So you're just writing it down. Now, the easiest thing about it is you don't have to do anything about these thoughts. All you do is you write a sign-off. And depending on what your belief system is, this can be something like a prayer where you ask God to remove it, or you can just write an intention to release the fears and resentments. And I'll give you a little example of how it goes. All right, if you'd like to do a non-God version and you want to release it, it would go something like this. I am now ready and sincerely intend to release these fears and resentments. I seek only to know my next steps and to be strong enough to carry them out. And then write love and your name. Okay? That's the non-God version. I started out doing it something like that. I became somebody who believes in God. So this is how I write it. I write it the way the person who showed me. And I write, I am now ready and ask that you, God, remove these fears and resentments. I ask only for knowledge of your will for us and the power to carry it out. Love, Anna. Now, I've been doing this twice a day for 27 years. I've missed some days here and there. And in fact, I spent 2 years not doing it at all because I just felt like, what's the point? And then I found out that I do so much better. My mind is so much clearer. I'm so much more confident. I'm so much less affected by the symptoms of my own PTSD. I had a traumatic childhood. And I didn't have a word for what my symptoms were back then. The way I used to get so discombobulated, the way I used to emotionally overreact to things when I was upset, get spaced out, I had trouble remembering things. That's dysregulation. So that's a brain state that's really common for people who were abused and neglected as kids. And it's also common for people with ADHD or people who have been through a recent trauma. It's really hard to focus your mind. And during that state, whether it's actual PTSD and you were diagnosed with it, or you think you have it, or you're just finding that you're having a lot of kind of like emotional flashbacks and you're having a hard time and you're stressed, this technique is just simple and easy, where you name the troubling thoughts, always lumping them in the category of either fear or resentment. You get them on paper and you ask them for them to be removed. So you may have noticed that in the way that I sign off, there's inflections of the 12 steps. And that's because I learned this technique from a woman who was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she and her friends were using this as a way to stay sober. when she met me and I was going through the worst night of my life 27 years ago, I knew I couldn't think straight. I was intensely upset. I was feeling like I was at the end of my rope and that I couldn't go on. I was crying. I couldn't stop. I felt like the world was against me. And she showed me this technique, and all that emotion calmed down. And not only that, and I will say at this time, I had a head injury at the time. I had been attacked on the street not that long before this happened. And I was having a really hard time focusing or reading, and it was making all my symptoms worse. We now know that these symptoms of feeling discombobulated, numb, overreactive, clumsy, can't remember, can't learn, there's actually a lot of physical symptoms that go with it too. It can increase your risk for autoimmune diseases, heart disease, cancer. Dysregulation is a very serious thing, and it's a brain state that often follows abuse. If a person has been abused or neglected in childhood, there is often dysregulation, and it's been often misdiagnosed as a learning disability or ADHD. I mean, it could be those things, but so often it's complex PTSD. That's the kind that comes from a chronic exposure to intense stress. A lot of us had it as kids. Childhood trauma is the most common reason that people develop CPTSD. And until recently, there wasn't really a name for it, and there definitely wasn't a very good solution for it. If you ever sought help for your PTSD, you may have been told that you need to talk about the trauma that happened. And if you're like me, sitting there and talking about trauma is actually very re-traumatizing. So I spent a lot of years going to therapy, trying to be helped, and getting very dysregulated in the chair there, getting so flustered and kind of out of my body that I could barely write a check at the end. When my friend showed me this technique, I had a way that I could communicate what was bothering me. I could write it, get it out on paper. Turns out talking is a brain pathway that often can set off that re-triggering of the trauma. Writing about it goes a different way. It's a roundabout way towards expressing what happened. And you can then, if you choose, read what you wrote to another person if you want to communicate it, and it's a lot less triggering. So when you're less triggered, when that trauma button hasn't been pushed, you are much more able to work on whatever is troubling you. You can make decisions, you can make a plan for what you want to do that's better. Those are all things that are extremely difficult to do when you're dysregulated. So if you're somebody who has spent a lot of your life dysregulated, if that's beginning to ring a bell, I'm going to put information down below. I have a quiz, are you dysregulated? I have another quiz, do you have CPTSD? Those will all be down there. You can take the quizzes and see if you resonate with them. But this technique of writing your fears and resentments and following it with a sign-off for about 15 minutes a day, the only way you're going to find out if it works for you is to try it. So I'm going to invite you to do that. Now, you probably had a hard time writing all of this because I was talking the whole time, huh? So if you want an easier, quieter way to learn how to write it, I've written up the instructions. It's in a PDF. I teach you how to do the writing. And as a bonus, I teach you also how to do a very simple form of meditation after you write so you can rest. So you get those distressing thoughts out onto the paper, and then you rest in meditation. And if you're like me, you will be amazed how powerful this is to clear your mind a little bit. I mean, clarity, doesn't that sound good? Feeling a little clearer, a little calmer. When you're clear and calm, you can take productive action to change your life. Everything gets easier. Okay, so some of the common questions that people give me about this. What do I do with the paper when I'm done? There's two things you can do. One is throw it away. Mostly I recommend you throw it away. You throw it away immediately and you shred it. This is not something you want to leave around for loved ones to read, where you're writing your deep, dark thoughts. And some of them would really hurt other people's feelings, like, fear, I don't even like my husband, or fear, I should run away. These are your dark thoughts. They're not really your plan. They're the dark thoughts that you're putting on paper so that you can be free of them. And in fact, the more honest you can be with yourself on paper, the freer you can be. You can shred it, you can dunk it in water, do whatever you need to do, but don't leave it lying around. There's no point to that. You also don't want to keep it. You don't want to write it in a fancy journal. It's not a journal, in fact. So no fancy paper, just scratch paper. It's not to keep, and you definitely don't want to go read it again on some other day. It's not a commemoration. A journal is where you record things that happened that you might want to remember, or you might want to analyze later or look for patterns. This isn't that. This is like just sweeping out the trash. Let's say you cut your toenails on the kitchen floor and you're gonna just sweep it up and get it out of the house. Because it's yucky. It's yucky just like your dark thoughts. So that's how to do the daily practice writing. If you want the full technique and videos where I go through the technique a little more slowly, show you the meditation, and tell you the story about how I learned it, you can click on the link right below in the description section, free course, daily practice, and you sign up. And when you do sign up for that course, you also will be invited to Zoom calls that I do about every 2 weeks for anybody who wants to come, and we use the techniques together. You can get some practice with me on it, and afterwards I answer questions. I love those calls. So I hope you'll join me. I'd love to meet you, not just on YouTube, but on a Zoom call. If you want to watch another video before you take that course, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about brain dysregulation, what's going on with that, and how you know if it's happening to you. You can watch that right here, and I'll see you very soon.